Hello to all of our listeners out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 40 of Canadian Patriot Podcast, 22nd, 2016. I'm your host, Andrew. I'm a libertarian competitive shooter, your reviewer at everydaytactical.com, and a firearms instructor. And tonight, I'm flying solo, but that's okay, because like any good Air Canada pilot, they left me alone with the corporate card at the airport bar. I'd like to hear feedback about the show. You can visit CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/feedback, or you can email the show at feedback@CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. If you'd like to leave us a 5-star review, that would really help us find other listeners that are interested in our particular brand of the freedom message. And if you'd like to leave that iTunes review being 5 stars and include something for Gavin to drink, he just might drink it, provided it's within reason. None of that Bear Grylls nonsense. Gavin's not able to join me this evening. He's traveling for work, or so he claims. You can also find the edited version of the show on Stitcher or on iTunes. I've been tardy getting the last 2 episodes of the show out lately, and I apologize for that to all of our valued listeners, the dozens of you that tune in weekly to listen. Episodes 38 and 39 should be out later this week. Also, if you could go ahead and go over to facebook.com/CanadianPatriotPodcast.com and give us a like, I would appreciate that. Again, more likes and shares helps other listeners find the show. If you've got friends that you think need to hear the message of freedom in Canada, you might try tuning them on to us. Or not, whichever. As usual, we're live on YouTube's Monday night at 9 o'clock. This evening, I don't have a panel to ask what everyone is drinking, but I do get to tell you about what I'm drinking. I have Crazy Uncle all-natural hard root beer, which is billed as a craft soda for grown-ups, and it's freaking delicious. It's like not quite A&W root beer, but it's very close to the flavor of A&W root beer. Like there's definitely the vanilla sarsaparilla thing going on. The 5% alcohol by volume doesn't hurt. I've also got a teaser for episode 41. At least I hope it'll be episode 41 when Gavin's back from having to go to work. Sucks having to pay for the welfare of everyone else, but I guess it has to be done. Went to a course in London presented by Rick Woods of Fire Arts Solutions Training over the weekend. We took the Active Killer Defense class. Rick is one of the, I take that back, Rick is the only instructor in Canada that's certified for Active Killer Defense through a group in the US. Overall, I really enjoyed the course. Like I said, this is the teaser for next week. Tune in to episode 41 to find out what Gavin and I think about it. The course was free to teachers. And yes, I got my butt kicked because it was 8 hours of, intense physical activity. But it was really more like probably 4 hours of intense physical activity and like 4 hours of listening to instruction and seeing demonstrations and trying not to get my butt kicked. Links for ActiveKillerDefense.com and Fire Arts Solutions are in the show notes. The ActiveKillerDefense.com/classes to find a class near you, and FireArtsSolutions.ca to see all of Rick's courses. I also have some upcoming events I'd like to tell everybody about. We have CQB match number 6 with the Ontario Rifle Association this Saturday, August 27th at Canadian Forces Base Borden on Langemark Range. If you're not already registered, it's probably too late. Register with me anyway. I might find a space for you. Good news on that front with CQB in Ontario, at least through the Ontario Rifle Association. The Ontario Rifle Association has sorted out their guest insurance issue. So non-members can now participate in one event. So if you'd like to come out to a CQB match in Ontario, or service rifle, or precision rifle, or one of the other programs that the Ontario Rifle Association organizes, you can do that without becoming a member once. We've also got the Meaford Long Range SEAL Challenge coming up September 2, 3, and 4 at 4 Canadian Division Training Center in Meaford, Ontario. I'll be there. I'm running my 308. For anybody that's interested in the technical, that's a Remington 700 XCR tactical long range Remington 700 with a Vortex 6-24x50 scope on top, chambered in 308 Winchester. I'm not a PRS guy. I'm just going to give it a go. If it's something that's, going to be a regular thing, maybe I'll invest in a real PRS rifle. But for now, my precision rifle work just fine. If anybody's going to be at the match, wants to hang out, I'll be there on the 2nd, Friday, September 2nd, for zeroing exercises and briefing. And I've got rations and quarters for the weekend. I'll be staying on the base if anybody wants to hang out in the shacks. Remember, all the regular D&D rules apply. No alcohol, weapons stored with quartermaster, etc., etc. There's also an Ontario action shooting match coming up on September the 3rd at Galt. Galt's just outside of Cambridge, Ontario. It's the next match in the shotgun series, so if you're going to that, you'll be sure to see Tyler, Jeff, and Gavin there, as they're all competing. I won't be, because I'll be busy playing with bullet guns. We don't have a panel this evening, as you may have guessed. It's just me. For your entertainment value, I bring you drunken ramblings. If you want to get in on the commentary, you can do that live on the YouTube feedback, the YouTube chat. I will be there waiting for your shenanigans. We're going to start with looking at some petitions that we talked about late last year, earlier in this year, starting with petition E111. This was a petition to reclassify the AR-15 rifle that was sponsored by Bob Zimmer. Received over 25,000 signatures. The government was kind enough to give us a response, which essentially said, go pound sand. 2.5 million gun owners don't matter. I'd like to read the government's response. The government thanks these petitioners for their representations. The government believes in balanced, effective measures with respect to firearms that prioritize public safety while ensuring that law-abiding firearms owners are treated fairly under the law. The government is committed to getting handguns and assault weapons off our streets and to strengthening controls on such weapons. The government is committed to putting decision-making authority about weapons classifications back into the hands of police, not politicians. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police is responsible for the technical determination of the classification of firearms in accordance with the criteria stipulated by Parliament in the Criminal Code. The Criminal Code regulations prescribing certain firearms and other weapons, components, and parts and accessories, cartridge magazines, ammunition, and projectiles as prohibited, restricted, or non-restricted lists the Armalite rifle, AR-15, as a named variant of the restricted M16 rifle. The AR-15 is restricted because of its lineage. The AR-15 is restricted because of its lineage to the military-issue M16 assault rifle. The government has no intention of using Section 117.15 of the Criminal Code to change the classification of the AR-15. And allow me to pontificate on why this entire thing is horse cocky. The AR-15 was designed by Eugene Stoner prior to the selection of the M16 assault rifle for use by the U.S. military. The AR-15 was designed as a survival rifle for Air Force pilots. It was not originally designed to be full auto. The M16 came after the AR-15. I also want to address the particular point that they're getting handguns and assault weapons off of our streets. The AR-15 is not a handgun, nor is it an assault weapon. AR-15s are, by their definition, semi-automatic rifles. If you want to talk about a military-style assault rifle, you're missing the fun switch. That's right, the AR-15 does not support full auto. It cannot, by definition, be an assault weapon. You can use it in an assault because that's an action, but then we're getting into the semantics of language, which is something the government, in my mind, seems to love to do. As far as putting the decision-making authority about weapons classifications back into the hands of police, no authority to classify weapons in our country. The Firearms Act, as part of the Criminal Code, classifies weapons. The RCMP Firearms Lab is supposed to use the technical criteria laid out in the Firearms Act to classify weapons. I.e., if a weapon is under a certain overall length, it must be classified as restricted. If it's a derivative of, say, an AK-47, it must be prohibited. That's not decision making. That's following the existing law. The Liberal government has completely failed the Canadian people in balanced, effective measures and scientific-based reasoning that they ran an election campaign on, because there's 25,000 signatures on this petition, more signatures than on this petition than any other petition in Canadian history, to reclassify the AR-15, which, based on its technical criteria, should, generally speaking, not be a restricted firearm. Yes, there are exceptions for, say, short-barreled ARs, because the minimum length is 16 inches and the minimum barrel length being 16 inches and a minimum overall length of whatever it is, 24 inches. I don't remember off the top of my head. The point remains that an M16 length, a 20-inch AR rifle, an AR-15 which has a barrel length of 20 inches, should be classified as a non-restricted rifle and should be a valid option for varmint hunters. There's no difference between, say, a 20-inch AR-15 and a Ruger Mini 14 ranch rifle. The barrel length meets the legal minimum. It has a detachable box magazine. It operates in a semi-automatic fashion, and it fires .223 caliber ammunition. Aside from being black and scary looking, there's no technical difference. This is an example of the Liberal government being a joke. They ran on a campaign of public input and scientific reasoning, and they're failing at it. We also have petition E48 getting kicked back. This was a petition on electoral reform. It garnered almost 15,000 signatures. I'm not going to read the entire thing. I do want to read a section of it, the very beginning. The government thanks the petitioners for their views on this important matter. The petitioners are contributing to public discourse that is vitally important to shaping the historic change being brought to our democratic institutions. To maintain public confidence, the government understands that Canadians expect greater inclusion, transparency, meaningful engagement, and modernization from their public institutions. Oh. Above all, the government will focus on listening to Canadians across our diverse society. The government will be working to establish a parliamentary committee involving all parties to study a variety of reform options to bring our voting system into the 21st century. The committee will be tasked to consult Canadians from coast to coast in order to develop its recommendations to Parliament. Once the committee is formed, further details will be available regarding consultation plans and opportunities. Again, running on that platform of transparency, voter engagement, and the scientific method, the Liberals have failed the Canadian voters because 14,000 plus people said we want to have a referendum. And the Liberal government has said, you're not fucking smart enough. You're not allowed to have a referendum because you don't know how to actually vote. I suspect that this, like many other conservative-backed petitions, is being shot down just for the fact that it's conservative-backed. But I'd like all of our listeners to remember, the Liberal government does not have your best interests at heart. The Liberal government has campaigned on 2015 being the last election of a first-past-the-post system where they won a landslide majority that was 0.1% less than the previous election that found the Conservatives in power. The Liberal Party of Canada, in my mind, wants to maintain their leadership of the parliamentary system. They're not doing this out of the best interest of Canadians. They're doing this out of self-serving interests to stay in power. I'm all for demolishing first past the post if somebody can come up with a real system. But to say that having a referendum where we allow every Canadian to have a voice, almost like it's a democratic process, and then ignoring the petition to have a referendum where every Canadian gets to have a voice, this is the Liberal government lying to Canadians again, because they don't want sound, fact-based policy. They want to stay in power. also have the rejection of E-124, which was a property rights petition also sponsored by Bob Zimmer. Again, without reading the entire response from the government, the line that scares me the most: as important as property rights are, Canadians have recognized that these rights are not unlimited. Which Canadians recognize that? What do you mean? What property rights are not unlimited? Environmental laws, municipal laws, laws regulating incorporation, the operation of limited companies, laws regulating the division of family property, succession and estate planning laws are just some of the many laws that place socially necessary limits on either ownership of use or property. That's not what Petition E-124 was about. The idea behind Petition E-124 in the Charter that Canadians own property. The way that the Charter is currently written, the government can take your property away at will. We're not talking about estate planning or division of family property through divorce court. We're talking about the government being able to, I don't know, come and seize your magazines for your Ruger 1022 because what you bought yesterday legally in good faith from a licensed gun dealer is now deemed illegal because it's so scary by the RCMP. Magazines that have been in the country for decades. This is an ongoing issue. We've talked about the Ruger 1022 magazine ban prohibition on Canadian Patriot podcast in the past. The entire point of E-124 was to stop agents of the state from being able to arbitrarily seize your legally owned property. Again, the Liberals have demonstrated a lack of willingness to work with the average law-abiding Canadian to do what's best for the average law-abiding Canadian. This is pure pandering to their voting base. They have to be seen like they're doing something. Again, I would love to know which Canadians recognize that the right to own property is not unlimited. That's a frickin' joke. All right, the next one's something that we talked about on the show before. I'm going to link to an article from CanadianAutoDealer.ca. Ontario will be canceling its drive clean test fee of $30 in 2017. I just want to point out that if a dumb redneck from Southern Ontario like me called that this was going to happen months ago, somebody should have gotten on top of this and be able to tell me why it's going to take until 2017 to come into effect. In 2017, we're still going to have drive clean inspections for our vehicles in Ontario. In 2017, we're still going to have drive clean inspections for our vehicle in Ontario. The only difference is that the $30 mandatory fee for drive clean emissions testing will be waived. So the government is going to pay that fee, which means that it's being paid through the collection of your tax dollars, which means you're still paying the $30 drive clean fee. Eliminating the drive clean fee has been estimated at a cost of $60 million. That's $60 million in tax revenue that the government still has to collect so they can give it to the Ontario Association of Automobile Dealers in order to inspect your vehicle, because you still have to have the inspection done. This is simple redistribution of wealth. We haven't said it on the show lately, so let me remind all of the listeners out there, taxation is theft. We shouldn't be doing drive clean in the first place. We certainly shouldn't be subsidizing it. And now the system is rife for abuse, because when are you going to get a drive clean test done? When you need to renew your plates because the state says so. You have to have your drive clean certification in order to renew your license for your car. So what check and balance is in place to prevent any sort of fraud against this system? If there's an estimate that it's already going to be $60 million just to replace the current system, like that's just me and you, like I have to renew my plate, here's $30. That's ridiculous. I also want to point out that the Ontario Auditor General report from 2012 found that the Drive Clean program had little impact on reducing emissions because automotive manufacturers had already done the work to make their vehicles more efficient. So what's the point of the test when the vehicle manufacturer is already making the vehicle so it doesn't emit as many emissions as to cause it to fail the test? The solution to this problem is to eliminate Drive Clean, which is a program that should not have existed in the first place. But since we're talking about licensing, since you're listening to me rant about licensing, really, I guess you could turn it off, but if you're still here this far in, it's your own fault for listening. License sticker prices are going up again. As of September 1st, the Ontario license plate cost will be $120 if you're renewing in Southern Ontario. Northern Ontario, it remains $60. In the last 5 years, there's been a 60% increase in the cost of license sticker renewals, at least for Southern Ontario. In Northern Ontario, the price has only risen a mere 46% between 2011 and 2016, going from $41 to $60. There's a couple things that I really would love to know about this, and I spent a significant amount of time Googling on Sunday to try and find this out. I can't tell what these stickers pay for. Ostensibly, it's for road maintenance. I already pay a gas tax for road maintenance. I don't understand why the cost of these stickers is going up. And if it's going up by such a minuscule amount, how much is it really funding the roads? The stickers don't cost that much. I already have the license for the vehicle. Why do I have to pay her to renew the sticker? And there's nothing on the Ontario government website that explains that to me. There's also nothing to explain the disparity between Northern and Southern Ontario, which I find very fascinating because it seems to me that in Northern Ontario, it's a lot more rural, and the average rate of employment is lower. So for some reason, the government is being benevolent and saying that because Northern Ontarians are less likely to work and less likely to earn as much money as Southern Ontarians, the Southern Ontarians must pay more. Again, taxation is theft, and this is redistribution of wealth. We already have gas taxes that are supposed to pay for road maintenance. These stickers need to be eliminated. This shouldn't be a requirement for driving a vehicle on a road. I already have the license for the vehicle. All right, anecdote time. I want to talk to our listeners about how sometimes our fellow gun owners are terrible people. So I went to my local gun club on Saturday. As you may have heard, I'm on the board of directors at my local gun club, and that means I'm responsible for some of the operations of that gun club. My intention on Saturday morning was to burn like 40 rounds of .308 ammo, double check my zero, make some noise, all that good stuff that goes along with practicing shooting the bolt gun, and do some administrative work for the club. So the first thing I did was walk into the rifle range, found out from the RSO on duty when they're doing a target change, which is going to be in about 30 minutes. Fine, no problem. It's a 2-second walk from the rifle range to the main clubhouse. So I dropped my gear off. I've got my rifle in my hard case and my ruck. Put them both down on a storage table. It's not a loading on like a safe area for casing or uncasing firearms. It's not a shooting bench. It's just a table that we have out of the way on the one side of the range. So I put my stuff down, said to the RSO, whom I don't know. There's 1,000 members at my gun club. I don't know them all. I deal with all of them. I don't know them by sight. Put my stuff down. I told him I'm going over to the clubhouse to do stuff for the safety course. I will be back in time for the target change. Okay, fine. I walked out of the rifle range, and the RSO comes running out behind me. Hey, you can't leave your stuff in here. And he starts going off on me about how I'm not allowed to leave my rifle on the rifle range, despite the fact that I just told him that I'm leaving my stuff on the rifle range to go to the clubhouse to do administrative work for the safety course that's going on for new members. Is there a bit of a frickin' disconnect there? Because it seems to me there was. So essentially it boiled down to, I told him to get out of my face, and if my rifle wasn't there when I got back, I was going to come and find him. So I went and I did my administrative stuff. We got safety course going on that was being taught, and I did some junk for the club. And I went back up, and all my stuff's where I left it, and he's still there. And he goes, oh, you came back. Well, yeah, obviously I came back. Where did you expect I was going to go? Like, I told you I'm going to the clubhouse. I told you, like, I'm doing administrative work. I'm wearing my ID badge for the club that clearly says that I am a director of the club. Like, get off my range, get out of my face. And that's fine. I go put my stuff up. And just before we do the target change, I say to the two guys next to the prone shooting position, because we only have one 100-yard prone shooting position on our rifle range. The two guys, there's guys sitting having a coffee on the one bench, and there's a guy sitting shooting on the other bench. I said, do you folks mind if I shoot from the prone position? The guys having their coffee said, no problem, go ahead. And the guy shooting from the other position ignores me. So I go up to him, I go, hey, did you hear me? I'm talking to you. He goes, yeah, I hear you. Okay, well, are you going to answer me? Well, yeah, it's fine, whatever, I don't care. So you don't mind if I shoot from the prone position when we do the target change? No, I don't care. Cool. Go out, throw up our targets, come back. The RSO goes, sets the line hot. I have to repeatedly correct the RSO because he is not very good at providing verbal directions for what to do on the range. He's very new, which is fine, whatever. I'm a chief range officer at my gun club. Part of my role there, in addition to being a director on the board, is to train new range officers. So I go up and I give him some coaching. I explain to him what he needs to do. And yes, blowing the whistle is a start, but also that you need to, explain to people what you want. The range is going cold. Put your rifles in the rack. Stand back from the firing line. All the basic stuff. Same thing when the range goes hot. I had to explain to him, okay, you need to tell people the range is going hot. Put on your eye and ear protection. The next target change will be in 30 minutes. You can go forward to or you can approach the bench. Go past the firing line. Like all the normal words of command that we're used to hearing on a firing range. So I go over to my prone shooting port, and I grab my 308, and I grab my box of ammo, and I go to sit down, lay down. And Buddy, he's having his coffee and talking to his pal there, youngish guy and an older guy. Older guy's a retired cop. This will be important in a minute. Skill testing question. They're sitting having their chat, and the retired cop sits down on the shooting bench and kicks his legs out into the prone shooting position. And they're chatting about whatever they're chatting about. And I got up to him, and I got a little bit into his personal space. And eventually he finally acknowledged my presence because I was essentially rubbing my junk on his shoulder at that point. And he goes, oh, yeah, you wanted to shoot out of the prone position. Why didn't you just say so? Because I said so like 2.5 minutes ago before we did a target change. I shouldn't have to like reiterate this point. Oh, okay, fine. So he moves out of my way and they bugger off to go get a gun. Mr. Hunter guy, on the other hand, I love sighting in season. I love dealing with these people that come to the range twice a year to sight in their deer gun before they go shoot Bambi. Chico's sitting there with his shooting sticks. He's moved the bench away from his shooting position and on top of the prone shooting position. So he's no longer in line. He's sitting on the side of his bench. He's got his shooting sticks, and he's got a 243, which I can only assume is a deer rifle. And he's shooting one shot at a time at his targets, and that's fine. He's loading his one round, whatever. I say, hey, excuse me. You remember a minute ago we had this conversation about how we're going to shoot prone? You said it was cool. Well, yeah. Do you mind getting out of my way so I can shoot prone? Oh, I'm not in your way. Buddy, you're blocking the prone shooting position. Your bench is in the way. I can't lay down and see the target because the way that the baffle system is set up, I need to be in the middle of the prone shooting port to see between the leg of the baffle to hit my target. Because if I'm over to the one side, there's a leg in the way, and I'll shoot through the leg of the baffle because we have a stupid government-mandated baffle in our range. The guy goes, no, it's fine. You can shoot prone. Yeah, I know I can shoot prone, but I can't shoot my freaking target from prone. Can you please move over? No. Where's that range officer? Get him over here. Let's get this guy out of the way. So we convince him to, because he's using his shooting sticks to practice hunting while sitting on a bench, which baffles me to no end. We convince him to move over the 6 inches I need to shoot out of the prone port. I'm about to lose my mind on all of these people because, like, I don't understand. I don't understand why there are other gun owners that have to be dildos like this. Like, why do you have to act like a walking phallus? Why can't you just be a decent human being? So Buddy moves out of the way enough for me to shoot prone. I get about 5 rounds down range. And I'm not rushing by any means. I'm taking my time. It's a bolt gun. I'm practicing some precision rifle stuff. I'm double checking my zero. I'm taking my time. I'm trying to make good aimed shots. And the range officer comes over. I'm about 5 or 6 rounds in. He goes, hey, Andrew, I need you to help me. What? What do you need? Why are you interrupting me from shooting? I'm not a range officer right now. I'm not on duty as a director. Like, just let me shoot my bolt gun. Leave me alone and let me shoot my 308. So there's this girl down on the 25-yard range. Our rifle range is common. 25, 50, and 100 yards is all the same shooting position. There's this young woman down on the 25 yards shooting a 22 caliber GSG 1911 style pistol. And I question her motivations for going to the range to begin with. Because she's, 20-something, 100 pounds, relatively good looking, like a 7 on a good day. And she's wearing her Lululemon running skirt and a crop top. And there's about 20 dudes on the rifle range that aren't shooting so much as just watching her. Whatever, not my cup of tea. Let her do her thing. I don't really care. I don't think it's smart to wear a crop top and running skirt to the range, but whatever. You do you. I don't care. Well, her GSG is having all these malfunctions. And don't you know there's about 15 guys standing around all giving her suggestions, but none of them know what they're doing. They probably couldn't find their ass from the hole in the ground, and none of them have got the right tools to clear a goddamn failure to eject. Easily 15 guys all standing there ogling this poor woman and her gun. And I have to go and get a cleaning kit and grab my multi-tool and get all this stuff out of my ruck so I can go over and go, yeah, your GSG is dirty. This is what they do. I have 2 of them. Trust me, I understand that. Oh, I just cleaned it. Your GSG is dirty or the extractor needs to be replaced. I have 2 of them. This is what they do. Sure, my boyfriend says, I don't care what your boyfriend says. Do you want my help or not? I could be shooting right now. Well, yeah, if you could help me, that would be great. Okay, great. So I get the 15 guys that are standing there ogling this poor girl to bugger off back to where they're supposed to be shooting so I can get in close enough to the gun on the bench to do some work on it. Knock the round out, get the pliers in there, pull the base out, fine. Everything's clear. It was stuck in there really good. Looked at it, yeah, it's dirty. Cool. I just cleaned it. I only shot a couple of rounds. Well, I don't know what you did, but you did it wrong. It's not clean. I can see that it's dirty. It doesn't look like the extractor needs to be replaced. I'm not stripping the whole thing to look to double check to make sure the tension's right. It looks like it's dirty. Clean it better. She goes, well, I just switched brands of ammunition, and now this brand of ammunition isn't working. Well, you think that might be a frickin' clue? Maybe don't use that brand of ammunition then? But it's still dirty regardless. She goes on about her business, and we managed to get most of the ogling guys out of her way. So I go back to my position to shoot prone. I get through about 3-4 more shots, and there's a retired cop sitting down next to me with a young fella and an AR. And by young fella, I mean roughly like my age, like late 20s. So Buddy sits down. They've got this new AR. The cop's going on about, well, I've built 4 ARs, and I know all about this, and I know how they work, and I can get them set up. And they're going to zero in this scope. And Buddy that's got the AR, this young fella that's with him, well, he's going to order custom reticle or custom turrets for his scope. so that he doesn't have to do math. Okay, sure, interesting concept. Why not? Give it a try. I don't think it's that hard to have a dope chart and dial, like spin the turret to get to the right setting, but whatever. If you got money to drop on it and you don't want to do math because you're lazy or dumb or whatever, fine, go nuts. If you want to get custom turret covers, who am I to stop you? So I'm listening to these guys have their conversation, and they're talking about shooting M855 ammo, you know, standard 62 grain, green tip, 5.56 ammo. Like, it's not fancy. It's military type ammo. It's surplus. It's got the steel penetrator in it. And they're trying to fill out the form to order their new turret covers. Determine what the ballistic coefficient of M855 is. So they want my assistance. They know who I am. They come over and can I help them? No, I don't know what the ballistic coefficient of M855 ammo is off the top of my head. Go look it up on the internet. Well, how do we find it out? Literally, go look it up on the internet. It's M855. It's going to be published. So they're already on my case because I don't just know this information off the top of my head. Not that they know, or that it's printed on their box of surplus ammo. I looked it up. It took me about 2 minutes on my phone. Loophole says that using the G1 ballistic coefficient model, call it 0.304. Easy. 2 minutes. I went on to JBM Ballistics, and then I went on to AR-15 forums, ARFCOM, whatever it is, AR-15.com, and I validated the numbers between a couple of threads on AR-15.com and what was on the ballistics table on JBM. It was literally 2 minutes to confirm that it was a ballistic coefficient of 0.304. Well, then they get into an argument about the bloody temperature, because they have to have the average, like they have to have what temperature they want their scope turrets calculated in. Well, today it's 97 degrees, but he sometimes shoots it in the winter. Fucking take an average. Like, this isn't rocket science. So I have to explain to the two of them, because they come back over about this temperature question. What do we put in? Do we put today's temperature? Well, it depends. Do you shoot it every day when it's this temperature? Well, no, I shoot it all year. Does it get cold in the winter? Well, yeah. Then use an average or get more than one set. Those are your choices. Leave me alone. Like, so I managed on Saturday to get through 10 whole rounds of ammunition before I had to leave, before I verbally assisted someone back into their own lane. Because I couldn't listen to this cop any longer talk about how he knew everything about AR-15s and everything that this young guy had was wrong. Because his trigger was too heavy and his scope was wrong and his parallax was set wrong. And the reason that his rifle wasn't grouping was all of these things except the retired cop who was adjusting the turrets on the rifle scope after every single shot. Here's a pro tip for anybody that's new at zeroing scopes. Fire a 3 to 5 round group as a minimum, then adjust. A single round is not a large enough sample size to adequately determine if you need to dick with the dials on a scope. It's not rocket science. It should be common sense. It's probably in the manual for the scope. But we have a know-it-all firearms expert retired police officer that's explaining to everyone that will listen how he knows everything about everything, and I'm watching him chase this zero around his paper because he's shooting in the lane next to me, and I've got my big 24 power optic that it was way overkill for 100 yards, but I no problem making out his hits. And I'm watching, oh yeah, it's not the bullseye, and you hear him crank on the dial a couple of clicks, and he pulls the trigger, and oh, he's a couple of clicks the other way now, and he pulls the trigger, and he's a couple of clicks the wrong way again. He's blaming the rifle, he's blaming the trigger being too heavy, he's blaming the parallax setting on the scope. But he hasn't actually fired enough rounds to have enough data in front of him to actually be able to make a point about where his mean point of impact is. Shoot 5 rounds, take the average, then adjust. That's all that it is. If you're gonna, it's 223, it's cheap. If you want that precise of a zero, because I mean, he was out by like plus or minus 3 inches, which 3 inches, plus or minus 3 inches is a totally acceptable battlefield zero for a rifle. Plus or minus 3 inches still puts you in the kill box on most North American game. It puts you within the kill box on most varmints you're going to shoot at. You're going to be fine. You're going to maybe miss a squirrel, whatever. You shoot at a deer, you're still taking your deer. You shoot at a moose, you're still taking your moose. You shoot at a person, you're still taking the person. Dropping them all in the X-ring at 100 yards, but this guy's not shooting off of a mechanical rest. He's not even using a sandbag as a front rest. Like, this guy, mechanically, he cannot make the rifle more accurate than a maybe 1.5 MOAs. So I packed my crap up and went home because I was tired of dealing with their crap. In the same vein, I want to talk about this Justin Bomar guy. So I got a link in here in the show notes for the Truth About Guns. Bunch of stuff about this. So I don't know who this Justin Bomar guy is, and up until a week ago, I hadn't heard of him. But apparently he's from Ohio. Apparently he's an American, and apparently he came to Alberta to hunt black bears. People come to Canada to hunt all the time. It's a big thing. No problem. This Bomar guy decides to do it with a homemade spear. All right. He's hunting baited black bears in Alberta. All right. It's legal to bait bears in Alberta. No problem. It's legal to spear hunt in Alberta. Well, we'll get into that. It's not illegal to spear hunt in Alberta yet. Will be now, but it wasn't the point. So this guy takes a spear and baits a black bear and kills it because he's hunting. All right, so he's gone to a place in Alberta where it's legal to do that. It's legal to bait bears. It's legal to take them with a spear, or at least it's not expressly illegal to take them with a spear. As far as I can see, I'm not a hunter. As far as I can see, everything this guy did was by the book. There was nothing that he did that was legal. There was nothing that was a problem. Now, of course, the anti-hunters immediately saw the video on YouTube and freaked the F out about this, because this guy can't possibly have killed a black bear with a spear. It's not like our ancestors, other humans spent tens of thousands of years using spears to kill things to eat them. I don't think the anti-hunting crowd would have been any better if this guy had used a gun, to be perfectly honest, or a bow and arrow for that matter, which is just about as primitive as a spear. But the backlash from the anti-hunting community online and starting petitions on change.org and contacting Under Armour pull Sarah Bowman's sponsorship. Seriously, what's wrong with people? What's the matter with people? So Under Armour decides they're no longer going to sponsor this Sarah Bowman woman, who, again, up until a week ago, I have no idea who they are. Frankly, I don't care. They're people on the internet. Big deal. I'm on the internet. Nobody gives a damn. Because Under Armour doesn't endorse this particular variety of hunting, they've decided to pull his wife's sponsorship. How does that work? Under Armour doesn't sponsor this Josh guy. They sponsor his wife, Sarah. Under Armour is a company that claims to support hunters. They sell apparel to wear while you're hunting. Spear hunting is an ethical and valid form of hunting. Again, some sort of a joke. What's the matter with people? If they'd been doing anything else as a couple, like say this guy, say his wife was a NASCAR driver, right? And he was caught illegally drag racing while he was drunk. Would all of her NASCAR sponsors pull her sponsorship because her husband's an idiot douchebag? I'm going to go with no. Maybe, but I'm going to go with no. Maybe some of them. But again, I don't think the consequences of your spouse should impact your endorsement from a manufacturer or not. It's not, in my mind, they're not related. So Under Armour sends out this letter. It's particularly addressing one person that wrote in. And they say, this is addressed to Kelsey, because Kelsey is the person that wrote in. And I love this. This is like reading the government's responses to petitions in Canada. Thank you for reaching out to Under Armour. We value your opinion and understand your position. Josh Bomar is not an Under Armour sponsored athlete, and we've decided to end our relationship with his wife, Sarah Bomar. The method used to harvest this animal was reckless, and we do not condone it. As a brand, Under Armour is dedicated to the hunting community, and we support hunting that is conducted in compliance with applicable federal, state, and local laws, as well as hunting practices to ensure responsibility and safe harvest of the animal. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to contact us. Your outreach is helping us make us better, and for that we thank you. What? They support the hunting community as long as it's done within the confines of the applicable federal, state, and local laws? They're pulling their sponsorship of one of their sponsored athletes because of the behavior of her husband? There's a non sequitur in there that doesn't make any effing sense. What he did was legal within the confines of the applicable federal, state, and local laws. It's perfectly valid in Alberta, or at least until they change laws, because now they're going to change the laws in Alberta to ban spear hunting because this is such an immoral and unethical way to harvest game. It's perfectly legal to bait black bears in Alberta and kill them with primitive weapons, provided you eat them. That's the rules. That's what this guy did. Now Under Armour is going to pull the wife's sponsorship because of some non sequitur. Would it have made any difference to the anti-hunting crowd if they had used guns to kill this bear instead of a spear? I don't think it would have. I think Under Armour would have come out with the same response because the anti-hunters are doing some social justice warrior nonsense on the internet and signing petitions which clearly do not work. So non-hunting crowds, so they keep buying Under Armour when Under Armour also talks out the other side of their face and says we're a pro-hunting company. No, you're one or the other. You're not both. You either are in support of ethical hunting or you're not in support of hunting. You don't get it both ways. Screw these guys. Under Armour is dead to me. I also have an update about Tracy Wilson. It was on episode 37 and her involvement in the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. In the recent weeks, Tracy's appeared on several radio shows and received a significant amount of hate mail and death threats based on her appearance in an article in the Ottawa Citizen. So Tracy was kind enough on episode 37 of Canadian Patriot podcast to come on and talk to us about the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. She alluded to what was going on with her interview with the Ottawa Citizen. As soon as that article was published, Tracy has received death threats because, again, we have to keep the guns off of our streets because clearly the 2.5 million licensed gun owners in this country are the problems. We're the ones that are walking around calling for the death of law-abiding citizens. No, wait, that would be the leftists saying that we're too American and we don't deserve to have guns in this country and the state's there to protect us, and that Tracy should kill herself, or that they should kill her. Yeah, that makes perfect freaking sense. If 2.5 million gun owners in Canada were a problem, all the people that had problems with legal gun owners in this country would already be shot. That's clearly not the case because the 2.5 million gun owners in this country are the most law-abiding segment of society. And I don't just mean in regards to gun laws. We've talked about this at length on the show. Gun owners in Canada are statistically the least likely of any group of Canadians to be involved in any type of crime. Now, whether that's correlation or causation, we can debate. Is it law-abiding citizens that become gun owners, or is it that gun owners happen to be more law-abiding citizens? We can go either way, and we can have a debate about that. But the fact that all the anti-gunners are making death threats about someone advocating for firearms rights that we already have in this country for the most part, because the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights is not advocating any sort of massive change to their firearms law. They're not saying, storm Parliament, have a coup d'etat, repeal the Firearms Act. They're talking about common sense gun control. They're talking about applying the existing laws. They're talking about fighting the RCMP's new prohibition of the Ruger 1022 magazines, which were legal up until the point where the RCMP decided, well, actually, we can reinterpret this law to make them illegal. The CCFR is not some right-wing conspiracy nut job, militia group that's advocating violent change. They're talking about educating the average Canadian to our existing firearms laws. And the rabid statist leftists are calling for the violent execution of somebody saying that we need to enforce the existing laws. That is absolutely 100% outrageous. I'd like to get Tracy back on the show to find out what her comments are on this are. I do have another anecdote about this because actually a colleague of mine came up to me today and he said he was listening to, I think he said he was listening to AM 580 because he's 50 and I guess that's what you do when you get old. I'm calling middle-aged old now, whatever, get over it. And he was telling me about how he heard this woman on AM 580 talking about gun control. And I heard about this. I said, oh, who was it? Wendy Sukier from Ryerson? And he said, no, actually, it was somebody that was talking about pro-gun stuff. I said, oh, really? Sorry, folks, beer break. I'll edit it out. So I said, oh, really? Was it Tracy Wilson? Was she talking about the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights? Well, he didn't really remember that part. But she was really well-spoken, and she was talking about all the same firearms stuff that you talk about all the time. It's no big secret in my office, actually in my entire organization. I work for a medium-sized enterprise in the information technology space. And it's not exactly a secret amongst our 500 employees that I'm one of the gun guys at the company. There's a couple more, but most of them are out of our Dallas office. So he goes, all that stuff that you've talked about, she brought up a bunch of that. She was saying about how there's these 2-year mandatory minimums. And she was talking about how that if she doesn't have her license, she can go to jail. And she was talking about how she had to get permits to move her guns. And this actually sounds like a lot of work. And him and I, my colleague and I actually had a really good, probably 20-minute conversation about the gun laws in Canada. So the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, while they are apparently reaching the older demographic, are at least reaching Canadians. And they're making them think to the point where maybe our gun laws actually don't make sense. So I explained to my colleague what was involved in like the process of just me moving. Because he knows I bought a house recently. And I was explaining to him how I had to get a permit to move my guns. And he said, but you own the guns. Well, yeah. Can you take the guns anywhere? And we had this whole conversation about how transportation laws apply to firearms. And I was going to stop at the range on my way home from work today. So I actually had a rifle, a non-restricted rifle in my truck. And I said, well, it depends, right? I can't just drive around with restricted firearms in my car. I can only take them to and from the range. That's because that's the piece of paper the government gave me says I'm only allowed to do that. He says, that's it. They just give you a piece of paper. I said, yeah, it's basically like, in addition to my license, I have a permit to move guns around. But I can only take them to like gun ranges or there's a gunsmith or, competitions at gun clubs, that sort of thing. I can't just drive around with them in my car. I have to take the most reasonably direct route from my house to my gun club and then home again. He goes, well, you go to a lot of matches. I said, yeah, and some of those matches I have to get a special permit because I don't have a permit to go to that place. So like when I go to military ranges to shoot Ontario Rifle Association competitions, that's a different permit than my regular gun club permit because D&D ranges aren't covered under your regular authorization to transport. He said, so you have to call every time? I said, well, no, because I have a special piece of paper that is good for several years, I don't have to call every time. But, if I go to a place where the paper doesn't list, then yeah, I have to call to get like special permission that time. So we had this conversation about how the transportation laws work, and then we started talking about how moving worked. because he's like, well, what about when you move to a new house? I said, yeah, I had to call and get special permission because my new. So in order for me to take my guns from my residence to my new residence, I had to call the RCMP and talk to my chief firearms officer for the province of Ontario and explain to somebody in the office when I was moving and why I was moving and get permission from them in order to move my guns. He says, what if they don't give you permission? And I said, that's a wonderful point. What if they don't give me permission? I have no idea what I would do. I'm pretty fortunate because of the way that my house worked out and my townhouse is still being leased through the end of the month. I'm pretty lucky. If they said no, I could just ask to do it a different day and maybe they would grant it. Maybe not, but he raises a good point. What happens if the government says you're not allowed to transport your firearms to your new home? Well, my lease is up on a certain day at my townhouse. How do I get my guns from my townhouse to my actual house? I have no idea how you would deal with that problem, except to do it illegally. And he says, what happens if you do it illegally? I said, well, they would find out when you update your license, and then you would, charged with illegally transporting firearms. And in my case, it would be a lot of charges because there are a lot of restricted firearms that need to be moved. He goes, but you're just moving to your new house. I said, yeah, that's the way our gun laws work. And there are mandatory minimums involved in this. He goes, I can't believe that. I thought she was just making stuff up on the radio that there was a 2-year mandatory minimum sentence if she didn't have her gun license. I said, no, that really would happen if she had guns and she didn't have her little pink card. And I showed him my PAL. If she didn't have her little card when she was moving guns around, or she didn't have her authorization to transport and she was moving a restricted firearm around, she could go to jail for 2 years. If she was charged and found guilty, it's a mandatory sentence. And his mind was just blown. He had no idea that this was a law in Canada, and how could they possibly do that? Because criminals would never follow the law. It's like, well, yeah, that's the argument that we've been making as pro-gun people for decades. Criminals won't follow these laws. So what good is it if I follow these laws? I'm not going to drive down to Jane and Fence and start shooting up some homeboy on the street corner. I'm going to go to my gun club. Or I'm going to go to my hunt camp, or I'm going to move my guns between my one residence and my other residence. And he was aghast that we could do these things and that we could have these guns, but we had to have all this paperwork. And he draws his own conclusion at the end of this conversation. He says, the government seems like they're making it really hard to own firearms. Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're trying to prevent us from owning firearms by making it too much of a hassle. He goes, really? They're doing that? I said, well, nobody's ever come out and said that. But yeah, that's what they're trying to do. They're making it such a hassle for me to own a handgun that a lot of people that would otherwise be interested in owning a handgun just won't do it. So it was certainly an eye-opening experience for him. I hope the CCFR has reached more people than my one middle-aged colleague. But if nothing else, they're meeting their mandate. They've educated someone, which makes me feel pretty good about my membership dollars. If they managed to convince one guy, they've probably managed to convince more. Did Byron Allen literally just send me a blank message in YouTube? My AR-15 and I will not stand for that nonsense. All right. Because I want to bash the Liberal government for a little bit, and there's nobody around to stop me. I want to talk about the Liberal health minister that recently spent $1,700 on limousine services. So Jane Philpott has conceded that it was inappropriate for her to spend $1,700 on car service and drive around the Greater Toronto area for a day. And she says this is not something she would do again. So this woman was from Markham. She traveled from Markham to Hamilton to Toronto and then back to Hamilton. Apparently, she managed to spend $1,700 in limousine service getting around, in addition, or no, I'm sorry, including $200 in airfare. The whole point of her adventure on that day was to announce in Hamilton at McMaster University $20 million in additional funding for chronic disease research being conducted at McMaster. In the evening, back in Markham, she attended a James Bond-themed gala at the Angus Glen Golf Course to support the Evergreen Hospice. Interestingly, I think this smells like nepotism. Because, surprise, surprise, the car service that she used was owned by somebody who volunteered in her electoral campaign last year. Bigger surprise, this isn't the first time it's happened. This isn't actually even the biggest bill for when this has happened, and it's been with the same service. In July, she spoke in Niagara Falls at the Assembly of First Nations, and using the same car service, racked up a bill for $1,994 for a single day of limousine rides. She's also managed to pay the same limousine service $3,814 in 20 trips to Pearson Airport this year to fly to Ottawa for ministerial business. I travel frequently for work, and regularly my company gets a limousine for me because it's cheaper for me than a cab. Sometimes I get a cab because that's cheaper. It depends on where I'm going to and how I got to get to Pearson and how I have to get home and whether I'm going from the office and if I'm traveling with other people. And I understand that there are occasions where a limousine service versus a taxi service or having a dedicated car for the day, that all makes practical business sense. And I'm not saying that our members of government shouldn't be reimbursed those costs. I'm saying that this looks like it might be a little bit of a case of corruption because it's the same limousine service that's owned by an individual that volunteered on Phil Potts' campaign. And the numbers don't jive for me. $2,000 a day for a limousine, that's a lot of limousine fee. That's a lot of limousine fee. Now, of course, the owner of this limousine company says that he would volunteer for any Liberal candidate, and it's not specifically to do with Phil Pott, claiming that the two don't have a special relationship. Except that Phil Pott's office has acknowledged that they are aware of who the owner of this company is and that he was a volunteer. And maybe that's fine if this guy had the best rates in town, but clearly this guy is overcharging. Or, again, in my mind, there's corruption here and there might be a little bit of a kickback for some work that was done. You know, you volunteered for me, I'll ride in your limo. Here's some money, comes out of the taxpayer coffers. The other problem that I have with this is pointed out by Charlie Angus, and I hate to do this because I'm agreeing with an NDP member of Parliament, and I generally can't agree with the NDP on anything just because their party platform is completely counter to my way of life. But Charlie Angus was interviewed by the Huffington Post, and I don't like referencing the Huffington Post, but it's interesting that he brings up some of the points that he brings up. He calls the Liberals to task on a couple of things. Not that I think it's going to matter, but he calls the Liberals to task on a couple of things about how, for example, this is a department that is ruthless in terms of nickel and diming the health needs of Indigenous people. Now, he's referring to people in Northern Ontario and other parts of Canada, particularly remote wilderness communities, where they have to fly out to go to a larger metropolitan area to receive medical service, particularly major surgeries. And he's right. Phil Potts' department has regularly denied travel benefits and other medical services to, we'll call them Indigenous Canadians, other remote living Canadians. I don't much care for agreeing with the NDP, but this guy's got the right idea. This Charlie Angus fella should be taking the Liberal minister to task on this, because how do you spend $1,700 on a limousine ride to go around Toronto for the day? I can't fathom how you could spend $17,000 in a day on a limo ride. Not to be outdone, we have another Liberal minister who spends $1,800 on a hockey game. So Jim Carr is the Minister of Natural Resources. And he managed to take energy ministers from the U.S. and Mexico to a Winnipeg Jets hockey game and charge taxpayers almost $1,800. There were 7 tickets to an NHL game in February against the Boston Bruins. The tickets worked out to a cost of $1,300, roughly. He also seems to have a problem with limousine services. As their 1 kilometer limousine ride to Winnipeg's MTS Center Arena was $525. Again, I'm in an industry and a role in my company where I'm occasionally required to engage in social outings with our customers. And I understand that. And if we treat government as a business entity, which I don't think we necessarily should, but fine, you have your colleagues from another agency, company, client-vendor relationship. You take them out, you do some team building, bonding experience. And we've done sporting events. I've been involved in those at my company. It makes sense. People like those sort of things. It's not my cup of tea, but whatever, a Free Jays game is a Free Jays game, sure. I can understand that. 7 tickets for $1,400. I don't know what tickets go for at the MTS Center to see the Winnipeg Jets play, but $200 a ticket is a little steep to me. Maybe that's in line with what prices are. Somehow I don't think they were sitting in the nosebleeds. The $500 limo ride, though, is the part that I find questionable. Because first off, they were a kilometer away. I realize it's February in Winnipeg. Walking a kilometer is probably not ideal, but it probably wouldn't have killed you. But $500 for a limo ride for 7 people? That does not seem like a good bargain. Like, we should shop around. The government should be, not looking to spend all of the money. Now, as part of the expense process, the minister had to describe why the event would provide value for the money. A Conservative MP, our friend Candice Bergen, did an access to information request, and she found that the section for the value for money explanation was left blank, which it could be an oversight if we give Jim Carr the benefit of the doubt, but I'm not willing to do that. There needs to be an explanation about why they're spending government money. If he wants to take people to a hockey game, again, if we treat government as business, I'm not opposed to doing that. I'm opposed to the $200 a seat ticket, and I'm opposed to the $500 1 kilometer limo ride. Those both seem excessive. Now, of course, the spokesman for the government has said that this expense is all within the Treasury Board Directive on Travel, Hospitality, Conference, and Event Expenditures. So the government investigated the government and found the government did nothing wrong. Surprise, surprise. I don't really have anything else for tonight. I was going to talk about Shiny Pony and the Tragically Hip. I think I'm actually going to save that for episode 41. We'll talk about that with a wider group of people because I'm going to alienate myself from many of our fans. I'm not a huge fan of the Tragically Hip. They make good music. They're Canadian. They're not my cup of tea. I've listened to their stuff. They've got some songs that I enjoy. They got some songs that I don't care for. They're sort of middle of the road as far as my musical tastes are concerned. I would like to get everybody else's opinion when we get a larger panel on to talk about why the CBC canceled Olympic broadcasting they paid $70 million for to cover the Tragically Hip. I'd like to find out about why, as soon as Trudeau shows up, that he gets all the media focus, and why the media is not focusing on Gord Downey's comments about the plight of a specific visible minority, in this case, Indigenous Canadians, and rather that they focused on Gordon Downey talking to the PM and the PM giving him a hug, and there are backstage shenanigans. But we'll leave that for a future episode. I have no rapid fire feedback this evening. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can do that at feedback@CanadianPatriotPodcast.com or on our website, CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/feedback. YouTube. I have no new iTunes feedback. If you'd like to leave a 5-star review, that would really help other people find the show. And if you leave a 5-star review, you can decide what Gavin drinks for an evening within reason. If it's something good, like strawberry daiquiris, I might even get involved. If you could go ahead and like and share the Facebook page, remember to like and share all the things you see. It helps other people find the show. If you've got friends that need to be woken up, we're probably the place to do it. If there's anybody else talking about Canadian politics and being critical of our government, I haven't seen it. There is no one else delivering Canadian content from a Canadian perspective with what I like to consider fair and balanced reporting. Remember, you can find all my work on everydaytactical.com, or I'm on Instagram and Twitter at @edtactical. Like we do every week, I'd like to remind our listeners that you are the true north, strong and free.